Australian police have raided the country's public broadcaster. It happened a day after police raided the home of a prominent print journalist. The searches are raising concerns about press freedom. ABC's editorial director, Craig McMurtry, says people should feel uncomfortable with what has happened.
It's not the Australia I know, for example. I've been a reporter in this country for a long time, and it's not what we expect.
In a statement, police say they were acting on allegations of publishing classified material. But the public broadcaster says the raids focused on a series about the alleged misconduct of Australian special forces in Afghanistan. To take us through this story, we now have freelance journalist Roger Maynard joining us via FaceTime from Sydney. Roger, thanks for the time today. Tell us more about these raids.
Well, these raids, as you say, have been widely condemned by the media community in Australia and have been also criticised as an attack on the freedom of speech here. It all started earlier this week when the Canberra home of the political editor of a Sunday newspaper here was raided by the Australian Federal Police. She'd earlier written a story, last year in fact, about alleged government plans to spy on Australian citizens. Well, they spent about 7 or 8 hours in her home, rifling through all her personal belongings, looking at her computer, looking at her phones, trying to find the source of this story, because it's the whistleblower they're really after, in this particular case, not the journalist herself. Anyway, they went away about 8 hours later, and obviously her employer, News Corporation, the Murdoch-owned newspaper, was furious about the way that she'd been treated and condemned it as heavy-handed and intimidatory and gross harassment, if you like. Then about 24 hours later, we had this attack on the headquarters of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation in Sydney. Again, the Australian Federal Police arrived, spent several hours in the offices of the ABC, ostensibly looking for information about the sources for a story the ABC ran in about 2017, investigating allegations of unlawful killings by the Australian SAS, Australian Special Forces, in Afghanistan. Now, both these stories were clearly had the potential to embarrass the government here, but the fact that they took such heavy-handed treatment obviously realizes or illustrates the concern that they felt about these issues being aired publicly.
And Roger, so what else are you seeing now in reaction to all of these raids?
Well, obviously, a lot of negative reaction about the raids on both these media organisations. It is seen here as a threat to the freedom of speech in Australia and media freedoms generally. The problem is that Australia doesn't have a Charter of Human Rights, and as such, the press and the media isn't protected in the same way as they are in other countries, like the United States. The Australian human rights lawyer, Geoffrey Robertson, has condemned this week's raids and claims they had nothing at all to do with national security, but more about the importance of public interest journalism. The Prime Minister, who's in the UK at the moment, he's insisted that the government was committed to press freedom and that nobody, he said, was above the law. He said, my government is absolutely committed to the freedom of the press, and he insisted that the matters were being pursued by the federal police at arm's length from the government. So it wasn't the government carrying out these raids, but the federal police, and that the government had nothing to do with it, and the ministries, the government bureaucrats, had nothing to do with it either. But it's clearly a great concern. It's a worrying trend. It doesn't bode well for media freedoms in Australia, and particularly so soon after a new government was elected here. The Conservative government was re-elected only a few weeks ago, and it's felt that they feel, because they had such a surprise victory, it's almost as though they feel they can do whatever they want at the moment, and that's another worrying trend.
It's fascinating. Roger Maynard, thank you for walking us through it.
Thank you, Jennifer.
And we at CBC News Radio Canada have also responded to the raids at ABC. Our editors-in-chief say, in part, we at CBC News are very concerned at what we consider to be an attack on journalists doing their jobs, reporting on stories of the public interest. We also feel the public at large need to be concerned as well. Protecting and defending a free press and its ability to report on institutions and governments without fear of reprisals is a foundational principle and a key to an open society.